serving as. That's all right. That's all right. Do we actually have the public, anyone listening in? So I don't have to go through that whole rigmarole. Okay. So we will begin today's meeting by introducing all of us in the room so we can all make sure we know each other. So I'll start with the commissioners. I'll start with Commissioner to my right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark Jarrell, District 4.
All right.
Good afternoon, Laura Meyer, District 5.
Good afternoon, Lee Altman, serving at large.
Thank you. And now we have to go to our outstanding staff.
Shahid Rana, Economic Development.
Clay Andrews, Economic Development.
Keisha Whitley, Economic Development.
Megan Witt, Economic Development.
Jamelia Davis.
Come on, Jamelia.
Jamelia Davis, Economic Development.
Good afternoon, Leslie Johnson, Deputy County Manager.
Mike Bryant, Deputy County Manager.
And Timothy.
Timothy Tibbs, County Manager's Office.
Awesome. And now we do we have anyone online?
We do online. We have Fred Atimo with Economic Development and Tammy Thompson with Public Information.
Okay, fantastic. And we have some guests in the room that we are excited to welcome as they have been with us in the past and we ran out of time on you guys. So I'm really glad that you are back and that we have a little bit more time to devote to the conversation. But first we will entertain a motion. Oh, let's go ahead and introduce yourself. Sorry.
Susie Kedar with Central Iowa Regional Council.
Christina Dennis, Central Iowa Regional Council.
Thank you so much. Okay, so next we will approve the minutes from the March 21st meeting. So moved.
Second.
They're very lengthy. Are you sure you guys had enough time to look those over? Okay. So let's go through a roll call vote. Commissioner, well, it's just since we're not, we don't have anyone online, we can just say all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
So that's unanimous to approve the minutes. So I will turn it over to Leslie if you want to set up where we're at.
Awesome.
Dr. Johnson.
You are most definitely welcome. As you see on your agenda, there's 2 agenda topics that we have for you today. The first one's on the Community Development Block Grant. It really is Timothy is going to give us a quick recap and then allow the majority of the time for Q&A. Again, we're very appreciative that Christina and Susie rejoined us, given that we ran out of time and they afforded the opportunity to come back to us. So we're very appreciative of that. And then the second one will be the primer or overview or the basics as it relates to tax increment grants. And Shahid will do that for us. Then we will go into closed session.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for allowing us to come back again. I'll do a quick overview and then again, we are glad to have Susie and Christina with us today. Next slide. During today's presentation, I'm just going to do a quick recap of the Community Development Block Grant Program, just overview some basics, program requirements, look at our geography and funding allocations, the program impacts, and some of the challenges and opportunities that we quickly honed in on at our last meeting. Next slide. As you recall, CDBG and HUD have 3 national objectives that should benefit low, moderate income persons. It should prevent or eliminate slums or blight. And it also should have a particular existing urgent need. And at least 70% of the CDBG funds must be used for activities that benefit LMI income persons. I apologize. I've gotten braces redone, so it's kind of relearning to talk over the braces. So I apologize if you didn't.
I did too during the pandemic.
Wow.
Nobody
So
saw.
it's interesting. So thank you for that. So the CDBG program geography, it includes all of the towns and the unincorporated areas of the county. The town of Mint Hill was added the most recently around 2020 rather. So it includes the entire geography and unincorporated areas of the county. Next slide. We began our program with the actually Central Iowa's assistance many moons ago, around 2010. We began with the humble $593,000, approximately 600,000. And over the time, it's grown based on our population and how Mecklenburg County has grown to the point where we're now at 961. Was at 961, 498. So in total, the total allocations over that period is right around $9 million. And then, of course, if you're all familiar, we had 2 tranches of COVID funds in the amount of 1.324 and 695 that we're still trying to spend. Just for comparison's sake, we're receiving this year $961,000 for the upcoming federal fiscal year. And the city of Charlotte has their own program, and they have $5,600,000. So because they are more densely populated, they have a larger population, they get a much larger pot of funding. So a lot of time when we have programs, people say, oh, CDBG, but it's really limited to a very small defined area. So that's one of the things I want to kind of point out there. All right, next slide. So how does that break down? How does that 9 million approximately break down? So 20% of the award can be used for planning and administrative costs, and that would total $1.4 million. What I'll say for that, Centralina, just to clarify, Centralina, we negotiate their contract each year, and they are averaging right around 15% on average of that funding. And what happens is the remaining of the balance stays in our program. And if a project needs more funding or if they're able to spend, then we can re-obligate those funding. So our administrative costs are right around 15% rather than 20%, but 20 is allowed by the program. Up to 15% of the annual allocation is allowed for public service activities. Public activities, those for us represent child care subsidy program with Christ Our Shepherd, and also with Davidson Cornelius Child Development Corporation. So our public funding, which is a very small part, that's only 15%, can go to those types of activities in the near future. And then the remaining projects go to other eligible projects, usually infrastructure projects and so forth. So that's kind of the breakdown of where that money is. You'll see the note at the bottom, we have 2.3 million in unspent allocated current and ongoing. What that looks like every year, every project has a 5-year, it's a multi-year grant. So you may start a infrastructure project and it may take you 3 to 4 years from the time, you do all the site plan, you acquire land and the sort. So it gives you the flexibility to have 5 years. However, each year HUD looks at your amount in your and says you have to have no more than 1.5 of your allocation in your coffers. So we have to have these projects work. They have to be shovel ready. They need to be ready to move as quickly as possible because we're always on the clock to spend these funds now. Next slide. I'm sorry, any questions? I'm going pretty fast. So far, so good?
We could wait till the end, I guess, unless anyone has a burning one. No.
Okay. All right. So really quickly, I've already talked about our public service activities, which include mostly our child care subsidy program. And that serves over 620 families mostly in the northern towns. Next slide. We do a lot of housing and rehabilitation activities, critical repair. Typically our habitats handle that work for us and we have contracts with them. As you can see, we benefited 98 housing units and $1 million total investment. We feel like the best way to deal with affordable housing is keep people in their housing as a start. So this is a very beneficial program for us. Next slide. Infrastructure projects. We've done a ton of water line and sewer taps. We do a lot of sidewalk and street connectivity, putting sidewalks down, connecting low mods to other areas, improving walking trails and parks and so forth in that area. We have a lot of great projects. Right now, we have a huge project in Huntington Green and Huntersville that's going to be probably around $650,000 and will impact hundreds of residents and really add connectivity to that part of the community, to the Huntersville, I guess, walkable areas. Let's see, next slide. And if you're familiar with Ada Jenkins Center, we've done a lot of work, 1.8 million there. And as you know, they have their co-house DSS there. They have child aftercare programs. They have food services. They are stable in the community. So the food bank, they have health services all operating there. So it's really a tremendous asset, and we've been happy to support them at 1.8 invested. Let's see. And of course, this is the breakdown of our CDBG-CV funds. We had the micro business stabilization program that spent right around 286. We had that served about 28 businesses, although we had like 10 times more applications from the city of Charlotte. The mortgage payment assistance program didn't do as well. It served about 5 homeowners, but we found that by the time that funding hit, it was so stringent what we could do. It really didn't have the impact. And right now we're working on 2 park improvements, both in Pineville and also the David Waymer area of Pottstown. That's going to really overhaul, with the help of Huntersville, the David Waymer Park in a transformational way. There, we're doing a multi-play. There's going to be some ball courts. There's going to be pickleball. Huntersville plans to add a splash pad there. And really, they're, along with what they're doing with their signage and other things, it's going to really, enhance what the county is already doing there in terms of supporting that area. Next slide. So some of the CDG program challenges, as you can see, the Mecklenburg County is grown. It looks differently from 10, 12 years ago. And the number of HUD qualified census tracts where we can automatically put programs in those projects is shrinking tremendously. In fact, it's becoming harder and harder just based on the data, which is American Climate, the ACS data, to really qualify those areas. As you know, there's continuous competition for land within the county. HUD is very restrictive. So HUD, if we're in competition with a homeowner who really wants to sell their land and they have to wait 18 months for us, but a landowner can cut them a check that week, we're going to pretty much lose those. And we're seeing that pain trickle down to the habitats, because now they're feverishly trying to compete and work with to provide housing. And again, I've kind of alluded to the regulations, federal regulations. Each of our projects must have an environmental review. So if you touch land, you have to check for invasive species. You have to do water and soil samples. You have to go through the process of all the regulatory things that HUD wants us to do. And as you can imagine, the executive directors for a habitat or so, that can be overwhelming, and they don't necessarily have a lot of support to do that well. And it's not as an incentive exactly for them to do that. The timeliness component, I already kind of talked about how we're constantly on the clock. So we're constantly on the clock, even if we have good programs, because we're still dealing with the after effects of COVID, the supply chain issues. And guess what? It's hard to find people that want to bid on these small jobs when work is abundant in Mecklenburg County. Next, the limited percentage of public funding. We find that the public service funding, the 15% that supports our child care subsidies, that's probably the easier funding to spend, and it allows us more flexibility. However, it's 15%. So it really restricts what we can do. And I'll pause there. Any other comments from you all, Susie or Christina, to add on to that? Okay. Okay. All right, next slide. So as we talked and kind of alluded to before, we're doing this first to give you all some insight, a little bit more information, but also say, what can we do? What is the next step? Is this an opportunity for us to work with our lobbyists, to work with Starla, and see if we can help to kind of grease the wheels on some of these items that would help to transform our program, or at least make it easier for us to move funding. So first, reform the funding formula and the timeliness requirements. Mecklenburg County does receive an exemption, but the wealthier this county is, the harder it is to spend. So it may be that for urban counties like ours, who are battling gentrification and battling other forces, is there a different type of adjustment in formula that accounts for that? So we look at our formula and our timeliness requirements. You know, what are some things that could be relaxed in that equation? Next, we talked about adjusting the program limits for the 15% public service cap. That would lend itself to much more creativity and probably more projects that would be ready. Add provisions to allow funding for capacity building. We had a recent call, and some of our the towns and the habitats were like, you know, what if we could use funding from HUD for staffing to bring those people in, to bring in the administrative support, to bring in those trades and have them maybe staff persons that are doing that work for us versus the competition that we now have. That's one idea. Provide greater flexibility to qualify projects in gentrifying areas. Believe it or not, the area Waymar Park did not qualify. We had to do a special exemption. Now, if you know Waymar and you know that area of Pottstown, it doesn't qualify because right there around it, there are these, $500,000 to $1 million homes that are encroaching it. So because of the way HUD's draws their data and their program requirements, it does not automatically qualify. And we have to jump through hoops to make sure there's another way to qualify. And then I already moved ahead and talked about the exemption criteria that we could ask for as an urban county that's dealing with gentrification, those things. So we want to just kind of bring this to you. I'll pause now, see if you have any questions, clarifying, or just what your overall thoughts are.
And before you go into the Q&A, I want to kind of level set again and give context of why we did this. One, we have an annual community development block grant plan that we bring to the board every year. And at the same time, we also may get an update on status of projects. And so one, we felt it was important you just holistically understand the program, recognize that the program that we offer is for the geographic boundaries for the towns and the ETJ. And yet there's a separate community development program allocation that goes to the city of Charlotte. So I'm hoping you understand that at the macro level. The second objective is having a more, I'm going to say, intimate understanding of some of the projects and the criteria associated with the program. But then the most important thing as well is around this opportunities or the challenges and opportunities that have been presented before you. At my lens, the Pottstown one was like the icing on the cake. We know about this on a day-to-day basis as we see gentrification occurring, and that what was traditionally that heavily dense geographic of low mod areas does not exist really in our community. So we are watching it, and about a year or so ago, we were seeing it get shrinking smaller and smaller and smaller. So we're getting the allocation, but yet it's challenged to how we can use the allocation because of the things that are happening in our urban area. Now, I'm an advocate that with regards to low mod communities, I believe that you do want mixed income. But that philosophy is counter to this program. Mm-hmm. And so we may come back before you later as our partnership with Legislative Affairs, Starla and the like, and say, we think we should be lobbying for these types of changes and wanted you to also have that background and context as it relates to this program. And Tim had to fight hard, and we're still pushing the envelope with regards to Pottstown. We're with regards to being able to do it. And Tim basically, in layman's terms, said, if we can't do this, then what can we do? He asked us, nope, keep pounding. I want you to keep pounding. I don't want us to give up because this is an opportunity, and it is the example of why we want to do more of these other types of out-of-the-box things, but the policy may not align to what we think that is needed in our community. So I'll pause there and let y'all go for the Q&A, but I wanted you to have that context.
Thank you. Can I just qualify something before we move on to the questions? Is when you say, who is it the state or is it federal? It's federal, right? That
federal program.
The guidelines.
Program.
So as far as changing guidelines,
it would be our advocacy at the federal level for program changes at the federal level. So when there's, I know that Starla, we have legislative bodies that do stuff for the state and legislative advocacy that we have at the federal level. And then when we're making trips to DC, it may be depending on what types of conversations. I know conversations to date that we've been having with Housing of Urban Development has been probably around affordable housing, but the canvas is larger than affordable housing. And we are already a recipient of one of the programs from HUD, which is the Community Development Block Grant Program.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's entertain questions. Do you have one? Go ahead and lead.
So are we using all of the CDBG funds available to Mecklenburg County? Like, did we exhaust the pot that is available to us?
No, ma'am. We still have that about 2.3 million that's been allocated to projects, but they're still in the process somewhere between shovel ready and actually doing the construction parts of
Well,
it.
that's okay. Is there any money we're leaving on the table that won't get used that we need to find projects for?
No, ma'am. All the
Okay.
funds have been allocated.
Super. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, I'm kind of playing catch up here, but this is a COVID era program, correct?
No.
Did not
This
come
is-
from COVID.
Oh, no, this has been around since the 70s, 80s. I mean, this is,
Okay, we're just,
Yeah.
it's just the money comes to the federal government and there's just a lot of hoops we have to jump through,
Yes, ma'am.
particularly here. About Habitat, are they, I don't know when last year, but they had to stop home repair. Are we back into, are they doing that again? Because they ran out of money and held off for a while. We back into that?
Okay, so let me speak to, and that's where it gets a little murky, right? So the critical home repair program that you're referencing were dollars that came from ARPA probably, right? So there were ARPA dollars that were associated with that, American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And that funding allocation, maybe Mike, because he champions that, can speak more specifically on that program and where we are with that. This is another pot of money. So they're two separate different parts of money.
So when did they, they didn't run out of ARPA money yet?
No, they haven't.
Right, but
Those
they've run
programs
out
are
of,
still underway.
okay,
Yes.
with the ARPA funds.
The ARPA funds.
What about these funds? And are they still doing home repair? Do you not remember when they had to stop home repair? for a
Yes,
while?
but they're not connected. Is that what you're saying? They're not.
I understand these two aren't connected. I understand ARPA and
yeah, we have 19 homes in the pipeline now for the CDBG program lined up.
Okay.
So we haven't had to stop.
they're just different pots of money.
Right,
Okay.
correct.
Pots of money.
But are those with Habitat?
They were
The CDBG? Oh, okay,
Yes.
so they're using, okay. Okay, so that's the connection of the two that you're referring to.
Right.
Okay,
And so
gotcha.
there's no end to this program. There's no future end to this program. It's just an ongoing, we're not looking at,
Absolutely.
okay. All right, that's all.
They haven't made any changes in the program in decades either. Every
So could be a
administration
problem right
comes in
there.
and they'll review it, but there's nothing changing there. And there have been some bills that have died that have, to make, some of these changes, but they haven't really moved forward.
Okay. Commissioner Jarrell.
So great to get a presentation from you, my friend.
Thank you.
These are fantastic. You weren't even reading. Couple of things. When you think about the overall impact of CDBG funds on our community, well, so when you think about our budget, $2 billion, I mean, this is like, to me, it's like giving a whale a tic tac almost, right? It's not. It just, the dollars don't resonate with me. Am I just missing the impact? Is that probably what's going on here?
That's a great question. I don't think you're missing the impact. I just think it's just one of the tools in our tool case. You don't want to leave money around. I think what happens and what should happen is that we're working with affordable housing. LaShonda's doing work in that area, and the county's purchasing land, and we're trying to protect these areas. It's just one of those tools that we can be very targeted. If we had more flexibility, we could say, well, these years we want to target on this area to really help aftercare programs, or we want to target this area to focus on certain projects that would help, or maybe a county's targeting in those areas. But the way the program is currently going, it's almost, we're at jeopardy of returning funds soon if that happens. And that's not a signal, it's not necessarily reflective of there's no need, it's that it's hard to spend. So, and again, as our community keeps growing, we still inch up incrementally in terms of the money. So, some people may say it's not a lot of money, which it isn't. It's a lot, but it has increased from $500,000 to $1 million now. And if you look at the cumulative effect, it could be, you ask the people who've gotten their $8,000 roof fix, they're very happy. Those 100 homes, those grandmothers and those older people who are staying, they're very happy with it. So I think sometimes it gives us the opportunity for those people who haven't. And we haven't talked about folks with disabilities. We haven't talked about, having special targeted programs for, special needs, or those people who may be TBI or have some traumatic brain injury. So there's a lot of flexibility there. But if it continues to be, difficult for us to spend, then it just doesn't really become a tool that we can use. And then we have to go back to county dollars and say, well, didn't work here, so now we've got to, why not at least, be good stewards of this small pot.
Yeah. In Mint Hill used to not be able to get it, right?
Well, Mint Hill didn't participate.
Oh, they
They didn't want to.
participate.
Right.
Okay, that's what it was. Okay. Yeah. No, well, I mean, thank you for the update. I think it's important.
Yeah, I think that my thinking was kind of along the same lines as, how do you measure success, with the program? And if it's so, the thing that's concerning is when we say that the spaces where we're able to utilize is shrinking, it's not because poverty is shrinking. And that's, it'd be really cool if we could say, oh yeah, this has been so effective that poverty is shrinking. And that's why, this has had something to do with it, but it doesn't feel like that's really the dots that we're connecting. It's poverty may be even worse, but as you said, the people that it's affecting, it's helping those people, but it's not exactly changing the trajectory for these areas. Is that accurate?
Unfortunately, I mean, that's the reality. I mean, that is the challenge of being in affluent, tier 1 county. I mean, we're just, we're kind of standing there holding the line, but you're absolutely right.
It seems like it.
Okay, go ahead.
The only thing I was just going to add is that it kind of seems like we bump up against this over and over again, where we're in a state that has 100 counties, and we're one of the few urban counties where our problems are different than the rest of the state. And so similarly in a federal program, you can't have a one size fits all, and that's where it needs to be tailored to the different areas. And so it's not that we don't need the money. It's not that we don't have poverty. It's that it just looks different here. And so I am really glad that you guys are looking to try to impact the way the program is designed at the federal level. And I think we should be very vocal. I think Mecklenburg County should become a leader in trying to change the program and tailor it so that it can fit different counties, because I don't want to say, rural counties don't need it. Sure, they do. They have massive blight and things like that. But ours just looks different and no less needed the funds. And so I would be 100% in favor of doing whatever that we can to support the efforts to change the program.
Well, thank you. We're definitely in our early phases of trying to figure out what that should look like. You're, as Commissioner Gerald would say, you're spot on with regards to Mecklenburg County's landscape is very different than some of the other landscapes in North Carolina. Mm-hmm. We are trying to also get our understanding, but our landscapes may mirror some other urban areas, right? And try to understand, are there some other communities outside of this North Carolina? Is it a New York? Is it a Chicago? Is it Atlanta? Someplace else that has similar challenges, and what does that look like? Mm-hmm. So that we're not this lone person trying to advocate for change. Right. So that's number one. I think the second thing that's important to also be mindful of is that there's always low mod income, because low mod income is just a quadrant on a scale, right? So you have a community, you have what's the salaries or incomes in your community, you have what's the median in your community, and then you have the percentage of the population that is below the median. And there we go. So you're going to always have low mod. Mm-hmm. What has changed in our landscape is if you go back in the 70s or you go back into other areas, incomes were highly concentrated together. Mm. And so we have historically said, oh, it's the crescent. Well, you see the crescent slowly dissipating as well because it's becoming more dispersed. So where before the city of Charlotte, in theory, could concentrate on the crescent with their funding, now they're having to look at other areas as well because that area is shrinking. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't know if I'm in a minority. I know there are other planners that support my viewpoint. I think you don't want highly concentrated areas of one segment of the economic population, particularly low mod, because then you have the other social factors that get impacted by that: schools, roads and other types of things. Some people even say there's a higher corollary with crime. And so there's other reasons beyond that are the basis of that planning model. It says you have to have them integrated.
Yeah.
But again, the policies and the programs that were established by HUD through a lot of their programs weren't designed for integration. They were designed for segregation.
Wow, that's powerful. Phew. Well, gosh, how do we push forward to try to, I agree with you with your viewpoint. I mean, just look at our schools trying to draw the lines to have balanced schools. They can't do it. They can't do it. I mean, it's like impossible because of our segregation. And so it's, I think it would be great if Mecklenburg can, join with those other spaces and try to be a leader in this. So thank you for bringing this to us. Thank you so much for the work that you guys do, because we know it is extremely necessary, unfortunately. But as a commissioner who represents some of the towns in ETJ areas, I want to see how we can apply those funds, to the best usage. So thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, nothing else that I can think of. I don't know if our Central Line partners have anything specifically to share, but the one—
We can help your journey in any way, Leslie, we will.
I know you will. And I take that back. I will say something. And the other thing is there's so much stuff that you hear that our organization at large does, or our employees and team do, and you don't know what's all behind the scenes to make it happen. And Central Line and Tim are instrumental in getting, like, you'll be fortunate when we get to the groundbreaking and you'll be at the whatever and you'll be all celebratory, but this Wamer, Pottstown, if we make it happen, it has taken a lot of effort to make it happen.
Right.
And so a lot of Tim's time is accounted for working with our regional reps and alike and trying to push the envelope to try to continue to get us to be in compliance, to assure that we have programs that are standing up. And even during COVID, when we were fortunate as a community to get additional money, we had to think out of the box to figure out how do we spend this money. We did the small business, we did a little bit of the mortgage assistance and the like. But again, it's a little bit challenging to find. It's not like we get hundreds of people that are in the geographic areas that we're having to reach. But we'll keep pounding and we'll keep trying to find options to be positive beneficiaries for our community, as well as bring additional things eventually to the county manager, Starla for legislative affairs, and additional things to you. So more to come.
Mm-hmm. All right, excellent. And thank you again. I appreciate you guys taking the time to come back. Sorry that you had to make a return trip. Okay. All right, y'all. Thank you. Oh, you got a pen. You need it. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to turn to Shaw for the next presentation. I don't know if Leslie, if you're setting it up, or if Shaw will go straight to Shaw.
Well, we've had several conversations, and I've had probably one-off conversations with a couple of commissioners over time around tax increment grant. And we thought, per your direction, it would be very beneficial to give the primer as it relates to the tax increment grant, because while it is similar to the business investment grant, it is different. And so we want to make sure that you understand the fundamental differences of them, as well as afford walking through an illustrative example. And then, of course, make ourselves available for any questions.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. Johnson, thank you. Madam Chair, Commissioners. This is going to come off very academic, but I think that's quite well for this particular grant program that we have, because we've never given an overview in this depth. And with the amount of projects that are coming in through the county, I think it's beneficial to do some level setting. All right, Keisha, I think my clicker is not. We'll go next slide. Maybe if you push the down arrow, it works. There we go. So the agenda for this presentation will be the purpose of the tax increment grant, and I'll refer to it as TIG, the TIG framework, how it works, a few examples, and then we'll go over a few questions. So the purpose of the TIG is used to encourage public-private partnerships, opportunity for municipalities to influence development programs, to maximize private investment opportunities and public benefits. And typical public improvement reimbursed by this tool include public roads, water and sewer utilities, sidewalks, parking, parks, affordable housing, and other public amenities. The TIG framework, these are grants made on a reimbursement basis only from new incremental taxes with a defined increment area. These are typically through parcel IDs. The justification of use is for public purpose. So that would include infrastructure investments that I mentioned before. And the TIG is also used to help with gap financing for a particular project. The typical grant terms for TIG are either 45% reimbursement or 90% reimbursement of the incremental taxes over a 10 to 25-year period, depending on the project and the needs of the priority. And I'll walk you through an example as we go through on what does those terminologies mean and how they're applied to a particular development project. So TIG framework continued. Public-private partnerships to advance public facilities such as parks and infrastructure, as I mentioned before. This really functions very similar to the BIP grants that we do, in which someone has to make an investment up front, and then the taxes are then paid. There's a verification process that happens, and then we reimburse on the net new taxes. The grants are typically capped at actual cost or term year, whichever comes first. So if we have a not to exceed grant amount, or we actually have a grant year, whatever term comes first, then that's when we complete the actual TIG project. So if the grant term is for $1 million and the investment that the developer is making exceeds, and they actually we pay off that grant earlier than possible, then we don't go to the continued 10 years. We finish at the actual dollar amount not to exceed. Or if their grant investment is lower than anticipated, they still have to that grant term to make up that grant. So hopefully that explains it a little bit more. The developer must fund and complete the project with private dollars. The developer also assumes all of the risk if the development is not completed. And often an interlocal agreement with the city or another municipality with the county, because the county cannot directly fund the infrastructure outright. So interlocal agreements are used for legislative legal purposes with TIGs. So let me give you an example of how it could potentially work. So let's say you have this underutilized lot or block. The first thing that happens is that there's a parcel ID or boundary that's drawn around a particular geographical area. That can include several blocks, that can include a large parcel. And for example, if this particular lot was valued at $1 million, using our county tax rate and city tax rate, the property tax on this $1 million lot, as is existing, will be, $3,400 in city property tax, $6,100 in county property tax. That's as is. When a TIG is proposed, the geographical boundaries are written here. And if a developer decides to add public amenities and parks and retail and a mixed use complex and whatever that proposed development may be, for instance, if this project is a $100 million project, and for example, there's a $4.3 million gap. So this hence why we would need a TIG. If the developer say, hey, look, I want to propose a $100 million project, but there's this gap of $4.3 million for public amenities or park or road. So whatever it may be, we're seeking a partnership with the local government. And that way the local government receives the quote unquote public benefit, whatever that may be. It could be a parking garage, roads, infrastructure, et cetera. And then there's also a new taxable base. So the county now collects $616,000 if this proposed development happens. All right, so follow me. Now with a tax increment grant, if we were to go for 45% grant, the taxable value is $100 million. So it was valued at $1 million. There's a $100 million project. The new taxable value is 101, the existing one plus the new 100. but we only reimburse off the net new taxes, which was the $100 million project. All right, everyone's following me?
Yeah.
All right, cool. And then what would the taxes be on a 45% reimbursement? So this is a case study that we're going to use on the next few slides. Can you go to the next slide, Keisha? So with the $100 million project and a 45% tax reimbursement TIG, over 10 years, this would be the grant not to exceed for that particular project. So the county would still retain $5.3 million over that 10 years. So we only reimburse 45% of the net new taxes. So this operates just like a BIP. When we get to this state as well, although the developer may have a gap, we still have to run TIGs through an economic impact model, through our REMI model, to make sure that the reimbursement that we're giving back to the developer, the county is still being fiscally responsible and making sure that we provide all of the services to this particular area, understanding that we're reimbursing money back. So now, let's do a quick recap. You have a 10-year, 45% TIG, in which, through that scenario, a county grant will be $2.7 million. That TIG would also label within the agreement to support infrastructure, whether it's roads, park, or parking, whatever that public benefit would be. The incremental taxable investment is $100 million. So remember, we had the $1 million parcel that was existing, plus $100 million, right? So we have a baseline value of $1 million. So the leverage ratio, so with our county grant of $2.7 million, we got a $100 million project. So we look at it from a ratio perspective as well. So if not for this TIG at $2.7 million, then this $100 million project would not work, if that makes any sense. So we look at the leverage ratio as well. There are other benefits that can be included, but not limited to MWSBE utilization, which are often in TIG agreements. These are goals that a developer in tandem with our interlocal partners may address. They may say, hey, we want to see 10% utilization in a small business. If you have these storefronts here, we would like to see X, Y, and Z towards local business opportunities. There's subsidized commercial rents as well, which could be a public benefit. Local arts utilization. So these are things that are specifically written into a TIG agreement. And these are not standards, but this is all happening on the front end of a negotiation with any particular TIG project. And then any other public benefit that the county and the local partners see fit within the project, as long as it's feasible. So that's typically how it works. Payment process. When it comes to the actual reimbursement, the interlocal partners submit to invoice for review and payment. So the county pays the interlocal partner and not the developer. So if the county approves a TIG payment towards XYZ development, we pay the interlocal partner. So if we're partnering with the city will then send us an invoice package. We would review to make sure, A, the actual, I'm using this case study, the $100 million project, they actually built $100 million. B, to make sure they actually paid their taxes to actually be reimbursed for that. After we go through that verification process, and then also any other particular benefits that were promised, whether that's utilization of MWSBE procurement opportunities or for construction, whatever that goal may be, we verify that depending on our level of involvement. So not every project is the same. Not every project has the same goals, but for the things that we're responsible for, we make sure that we verify the invoice submission package before we submit a check to our interlocal partner. The county also, I mentioned that, but the county then disperses the funds to the interlocal partner, typically within 30 days. The interlocal partner then pays the TIG grant to the owner or developer as a reimbursement of paid taxes. So you propose the project, we verify its economic vitality to make sure that it's feasible. And then there's also the public benefit that we want to see as a part of our contribution to the project. There are other related goals such as utilization or local hire efforts, et cetera, et cetera. The project is then approved and then we move forward. Some of the other considerations, the grant terms are specified in an interlocal agreement. TIGs are not to exceed amounts. So the actual grants do not just continue to go and go and go and, you know, you're paying. So all of the terms that are in the TIG are clearly labeled on the front end. And then TIG payments end on the TIG year term or not to exceed, whatever comes first, which I reiterated. So for an active TIG project, I wanted to walk you through an actual project that we have active here now, which is Tanger Outlets. This was approved by County Commission in 2013. The TIG terms were a 10-year, 45% increment. The total TIG amount was roughly $6 million, with the county share being $3.7 million. The estimated private investment that was a part of the project was $190 million. The leverage ratio based off of the TIG's portion was 51-1. So with our $3.7 million contribution, the county received a $190 million project. Some of the notable public benefits were significant infrastructure improvements to leverage the investment and development goals. And then there was also MWSBE utilization for this project. This project is probably coming towards the end of the full payment. So we're closing towards the end of the line, but I wanted to just highlight a successful project that everyone's relatively familiar with in regards to the TIG. And now we're open for questions. So if there's anything that you want me to go back over, I'm more than happy to go back, answer any questions.
Okay. All right. Let me start on this side and see if Commissioner Durrell has any questions.
No, I don't. Thank you for the presentation. I think it was definitely valuable to go back through it, to see it. It's just, I guess the only comment that I really have is, for me, I think we've had this sort of haziness around parking garages and roads as far as public benefit from our perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But we are saying that, and I know we've done this, but to me it seems like it's been a slippery slope. We've had a lot of conversations around this,
Mm-hmm.
but we're saying this is part of our lens, like this is inbounds, because somehow I always thought statutorily there was an issue with us participating with respect to parking, roads, or whatever. And I guess the interlocal is what gets us around.
Correct.
That is correct. The interlocal affords, because the city or the local jurisdiction, meaning the city or the towns, are the ones that are responsible for the roads. Now, parking is another kind of interesting thing, because parking, not in many instances, in some of the instances, it is beneficial for us from a standpoint because we have an asset near it. So like when Eastland, that conversation, that's for that parking deck that also will be supportive for the park, as well as the retail that may be there. The Daniel Levine, there was a parking deck proposed in that one as well. Not necessarily support the park, but he also supported doing the park construction and the roads that are around the park for improvements that needed to be there in order to help us for the park, as well as just plain roads.
The only other comment, Madam Chair, would be, I
Your
think,
mic's not on, but no one's online anyway.
just in case, thank you. The only other comment that I would have around this is that I think the way that we get creative in some of these scenarios, I think is good. And I would like to see us continue to be just as creative when we're trying to help maybe some of the smaller developers who are coming to us with projects, developers who are people of color that don't have the same level of access and influence. When they come to us with projects and there's a delta that they're experiencing, and you know, we went through this previously, I think we've got to continue to have our lens and our focus there. And I would like to see us continue to lead in that space and be a true leader beyond the city or CMS or any other governmental entity as it relates to leaning in for those folks that are a tier below than some of these deals that we've done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I'm having no. So apologies, but tell me, compare and contrast the main differences between a BIP and TIG.
Main difference would be years and the terms and years.
Terms and years.
That's number one. Number two, a TIG is for a geographical area. And a BIP is a competitive grant for a company to move to any area. So there has to be a but-for clause in regards to relocating a business to the area. So a BIP, think of towards the business, and a TIG is for a geographical area.
So a TIG, a retention will never be a BIP because they're already here. Is that true?
No, that's
No,
a BIP.
a retention. So whether you're attracting a new business or they're expanding, the BIP is the business investment program. So they're utilizing the same tool.
Okay, so
But the
maybe I said it backwards.
competitiveness of if an existing business is about to grow, what makes them competitive is there's still competition for them to potentially leave Mecklenburg County.
So maybe if, maybe at your convenience, could you make me a graph that has,
Taking big.
Yeah, that would be really awesomely handy.
And one of the things
already exists.
it doesn't it doesn't exist at a glance documentation. So we can try to pull that together for you. What I would say, in addition to what Shah has already noted, structurally behind the scenes, they're comparable. Their purpose is where they're different. So the business investment grant is, as Shah just noted, is an incentive grant program as a tool for attracting businesses either to locate here or to expand here, to stay and expand. And the but clause still has to happen there where we have to know that you have other competitive locations that you're considering. Notwithstanding that though, in those instances, we're looking for X amount of jobs, certain levels of incomes, and investment in property, be it because you're renovating a building, you're constructing a new building, or you're bringing in equipment. On the TIG side, that tool is for development. What's happening in a geographic area, a neighborhood, a part of town. So it's site specific is when you use the TIG. And in that instance, you're trying to create growth, not necessarily tied to being accountable for jobs and salaries and the like, but you're trying to ignite some type of development, site neighborhood development.
Okay, well, that's helpful. And if you do this, which I would be so grateful, if you don't mind listing, like in the last 2 years, what we've done in terms of which were TIGs and which were BIPs, so I can maybe really master the difference and be able to differentiate going forward.
And I'll give you your quick list of the ones that like most recent of TIGs, just a TIG side. Innovation District, TIG. Bobby Drakeville, Greenville, TIG. Those are the Ballantyne, depending on, but I'm not sure if she was here during the Ballantyne, but the Ballantyne.
But I remember it.
Is a TIG. All of those are site specific. It's not about a job physically coming in. All the other ones that we talk about, like if Centene came, that would have been a BIP, or Alwar. The other things that we've discussed are BIPs. Yeah. But we'll still do that.
Yeah, we can pull that list for you.
We'll pull it off for you.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, Commissioner Meyer, no questions. Okay, so it's really infrastructure versus jobs is sort of what it boils down to. So the TIG is about building infrastructure that benefits the business and the public, well, and the
People.
business, right?
Yes, but think about like when Bobby Drake first went, it also included affordable housing. It also includes, so it benefits the business, but it's got to also benefit the public.
Correct.
Economic stimulus.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
It has to benefit the public.
Right.
Right.
Okay. The thing that gets murky when we apply it to specific projects like Eastland, like, because I remember, I feel like this came up when we had the city here, right? And it's like, just when you think you get it, then they throw all these things on a certain project, and then it's like, I don't get it anymore. You know, like how does this help the public really? Like, I feel very skeptical of the community benefit when I see the ratios that you put up. Like, that helps a little bit because like when you use the example of that mall, the outlet mall, that feels a little clearer. It does trouble me that the county can't directly fund infrastructure, but yet that's what we're doing. It's like we're doing these workarounds to try to help somebody. Like, what do we get from it? You know, like we get the return on investment, but
so I'm going to use Eastland.
Okay.
For an Eastland one, what you're getting is some affordable units.
Mm-hmm.
You're also, that otherwise would not be done because the developer would just go ahead and build what they can do in order to get that return.
Right.
You're also getting roads that help carve out and make accessible for the park that will be there.
So if there was no park,
there still could be roads. There would still be roads, right?
but that wouldn't really help the county.
Correct. But you're also getting, they're doing the Greenway connection,
Mm-hmm.
and you're getting sidewalks, which would be a public benefit. So typically we try to see what else is a beneficial for the county. But last, but definitely not least, the other thing that we get is the greater return in taxes when they pay the property tax. Because if it didn't exist, we would not get that greater return in property tax, right?
Right.
Which allows us to do all the other things that we do that are public beneficial to the community. So it's that other layer. So you try to get the immediate ones, which is gap financing,
Mm-hmm.
and try to ensure that there's things that are priorities for us, which is why you're starting to see affordable housing as a priority for us. So we're starting to ask developers, can you include affordable housing units as part of it?
Right.
And sometimes the easiest one in the past has been parks, and which is why you used to see a lot of the developers say, oh, I've got this little bit of green land, I'll make it a park. So that's what we've seen in the past, where that has been the biggest identifiable benefit for the county.
Okay.
Because otherwise it wouldn't happen. And most of our projects, I would say, has had some form of a park that goes with it.
Do we have a formula or something that helps us quantify how much park equals how much? Like, if we're going to give gap funding, we're going to fill in the gap with the funding. How do we tie it? Like, it can't just be, well, you know, they need this because they have a gap and we're going to get a park. Like, it should be proportionate to the amount of the TIG. Like, well, what's the formula? Like, how do we know?
It's not a formula, it's project by project, but Shaw may say something in addition to what I may say. The ones that I've been engaged in or familiar with, it's been project by project. So it says, to build this is the cost to do this, and this is the cost to do this. And so you're getting the itemized cost from them for the total project, plus the parts that are the public infrastructure, however that's being defined. So we know how much the Greenway cost is, we know how whatever. And so our reimbursement is associated with that infrastructure cost, not the total project cost.
Okay, so we're looking at, what would this piece of land cost to put this park on? What would this infrastructure stretch, this Greenway stretch cost us? Add that to the amount we're going to award. How much are,
Correct. They'll build it into the development program. I think the main takeaway is every TIG is case by case. And we look at, although my example was kind of floating in a white space, all of the TIG projects that we review are interconnected to some other capital improvement plan, a greenway plan. In regards to Tangent, there were job opportunities. So there's never kind of a, hey, you need a gap. Let's just build you a 2-acre park and no one utilize it. There's no connectivity behind it. Even in the example, Bobby Drakeford and some of the roadway improvements, they connected to a community center that was adjacent. Right. It also provided safe crossing paths in that particular neighborhood. So it's not just you need a gap, we're going to supply it and then you kind of give us a little green turf that's not utilized. Everything is within the greater context of our needs. So it's a true P3 in regards to public-private partnership where the developer is fronting all of the development costs up front. So we receive those assets on the developer's dollar in hopes that they're going to get reimbursed for making sure that they meet all of the requirements. So it's a truly one of the lowest risk opportunities for the county to A, receive new taxable investment, B, jobs, sales tax, and then also the actual upfront infrastructure costs. So because we can't directly fund the infrastructure, that also doesn't come on our budget. We're receiving all of the tax revenue first and then reimbursing it. So we receive our promises for assets that also have greater connectivity to like our capital improvements plan, greenway plans, et cetera. And then in return, the developer to develop this project is also getting an amenity that connects greater to the community as well. These are not gated communities where no one can come in and out. There is always connectivity to the greater context. So it's a creative way for us to use what we have and to try to do win-win-win scenarios.
Okay. So let me just ask one more question. What did we do before this tool became available? Like, how did it work? Did the developer just like have to be like, okay, I got to wait for the city to build these roads before I can do my project, or I got to wait? Like, how did it happen before we had this tool? Did the actual
historic wise, I don't know. I was probably in Baltimore or Philly about it.
This tool has been. This isn't a Mecklenburg County tool. This is a tool that's national. This is part of the planners. If you're a master planner or whatever, this tool is used throughout the nation. So it's not a county specific, Mecklenburg County specific tool. So I'd say that. The second thing that I would articulate would be development would just happen with no influence of government to how it could be shaped.
Okay.
So that affords us to sit at the table to influence or add. I mean, you would have the zoning and all that other kind of stuff, but I'm saying just to influence development and be creative. Like, you think about how many times we went back and forth when we had the conversations about Valentine.
Yeah.
And the board was able to influence what was there because you were sitting at the table and having that conversations to provide a tick. If we weren't doing that, the developer would have gone over there, done what they wanted to do, and it may not have those other things that as collectively y'all thought were important that should be part of that project.
Okay.
I have one more question.
Sure, go ahead.
It would be interesting to know what would be the impact, because I know that whenever we have controversial decisions about these issues, you know, a factor is that it increases our tax base from corporate sources so that we have less tax that we need to get from residents. And I mean, I would, you know, not asking you to actually go do the work because I know y'all have a lot of projects and I already asked for one. But, you know, it would be interesting to know what is the real impact over any given period of time to residents that they don't have to carry for infrastructure because of the money coming in from projects that we decided to induce with these tools. And a second question would be, you know, because we're certainly we've been hearing in the news, we're going to hear about it tonight, when businesses end up paying less taxes because turns out that their model or the model for evaluation is more complicated and not so straightforward. Like, are any of these entities that we were given models to show the money that we're going to get from them, are they actually going to pay less because it turns out that there's a valuation that they're not actually going to pay the taxes that we thought they were going to pay because their property is valued differently than what we were told?
That would work against them. If they're paying less taxes, there's less reimbursement,
Right.
and they don't fulfill their grant obligation. It's actually to their advantage to build more, to be valued as more, to get more of return faster.
Right.
So if a company is estimating a certain valuation at $100 million and the tax valuation comes in at 65, guess what? It will take longer for them to actually get the return back.
So our residents are protected, even if their property
Correct.
loses value.
So if their property values go down, they pay less in taxes, they're getting less reimbursement.
Correct.
And remember, we have a not to exceed on a dollar amount or a year.
Right.
So the
whichever
valuation
comes
goes
first.
down, the grant amount hasn't been fulfilled, and they reach that end of the grant year term, guess what? They do
all
not
they
get
get.
any reimbursement past that year.
Right.
But that's not all businesses. That's just ones that we've
That
doing-
incentivized.
Right.
Right. I just want to make sure that
Right.
if this business with, valuation,
Their
burden
wouldn't be pushed to residents.
it wouldn't change their obligation. No.
And remember, all of the infrastructure, public benefit things are paid up front by the developer. So this isn't out of the county's pocket. So whatever they're committed to, the developer owner has to pay up front in advance for that to happen. So it's truly a extremely low risk opportunity for municipality. The other option that municipalities would do would be a tax bond, in which governments would take out a bond to then fund those improvements on the front end in hopes that the valuation and tax increase would pay off that. That would be a general bond,
Right.
or you would do a revenue bond in which you would take revenue from a parking authority or a particular revenue stream of the government. So with this opportunity as a tax increment grant, the county doesn't issue bonds, so we don't leverage our credit. And then with times of uncertainty, even when interest rates are high, then bond rates are higher to offset that cost. And then we're not obligating revenue from additional sources from the county, which mitigate risks from other vulnerabilities within our budget. So with this, we're not exposing the county to risk through bonds and loans. Number two, the developer pays for everything up front. And number three, it's the incentive of the developer to fulfill that development cost to be reimbursed what was promised. So we don't pay anything out unless they've paid their taxes up front and all of the other terms of the development agreement are agreed upon. I think the other takeaway from this particular experience is that everyone's starting to level set and have an understanding. Typically, you will hear about TIGs and projects, and there's this uncertainty and everything else. We're extremely involved and active in all of the conversations, the verification and payment process, and also contract negotiations moving forward. So this kind of new season that we're in, there's more transparency, more collaboration and partnership. So that's a part of the reason why we want to share this with you as well. So when you're hearing about these projects, you'll be informed on A, how the structure works, and B, that we're integrating and we're getting involved a lot more on the front end.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful, because I think a lot of times it just seems like developers come out smelling like a rose no matter what. And, it's really hard to justify as, just, anyway, did you had another?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I think even with that being said, though, I think where a lot of times as electeds, there's heartburn is because developers and the business of making money. They're not, it's not
Smelling like a rose, yeah.
type of approach. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
Right.
you guys heard me say it 1,000 times.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with it. But what happens is we have to, and I hate to use this term, but I'm going to use it. We have to sell it to the community about these benefits, right? There's this public benefit, but they're getting the public benefit. They're making money. And so I think that's where the heartburn comes in. And I know we have to go to closed session, but I wanted to say real quick, when we were doing Ballantyne Reimagine, so one of the things that I advocate, or I mentioned, I didn't advocate, but I mentioned about when they were talking about the retail space, Les, I don't know if you remember when I said, listen, I know, why don't we start looking at our MWBE component differently and subsidize businesses of color? You remember when I was saying this, subsidized businesses of color. So everybody looked at me like I had 10 heads, right? Because I'm trying to figure out a different way for us to look at MWBE. And one of the things that I just had an aha moment, because you put that in the slide, and I was like, yeah, I remember saying this. No one really commented on it, which was fine. But I do think as electeds, we have to kind of look at this, just like the tool that they're using, the TIG, it's creative financing to help developers, bridge that gap. It's creative and it's used all over the country, but it's creative. So if they're going to be creative, I think as electeds, we are going to have to get into a space where we're demanding certain things. So when you talk to us about MWBE and you say, okay, we can't meet the construction metrics because there's not enough of these people out here, whatever. Okay, then you got to subsidize your retail spaces. You have to subsidize some other spaces. You have to give us more affordable housing units if you want to take. If not, we're on to the next. But I think this has been so helpful because now you can see we have a little more options than the A and B that comes to us sometimes.
Right. And to that point, we're trying to be also creative as well, right? As staff and everything like that. And I think when you reference the MWBE, we were just doing another one and confirming in the agreement, it has to spell out what the expectations are. Again, if you didn't give the TIG, you wouldn't be at the table to say, and we want you to do construction with X amount of people, or we want this. And so sitting at the table allows you to negotiate other things that are a priority for you that we can advance. And that's why I said the Ballantyne one, it went back and forth and you got a little bit more. And if you weren't at the table, Ballantyne development just would have happened.
Right.
That's right. Good point.
All right. Well, thank you. I think that exhausts that topic so we can get on to our closed session.
Before we go into closed session, I want to acknowledge our guests here for record purposes. Before we go into closed session, if you can state your name and affiliation.
Terry Lansdale, Planning Commission.
Thank you.
Hey, Terry. Sorry, we have to kick you out.
So you just moved to go in closed session. We'll move us
hear
quickly.
A motion?
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That is unanimous to go into closed session.
So.
All right. So all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that is unanimous. So we are adjourned. We have 8 minutes to get to our closed session. Yeah. Yeah.
Great job, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Great info to